Klumph couldn't shake Shiron's words from his mind, how the kid claimed he'd never regret dying if it meant being Rian's friend. At first, Klumph had just thought the boy was sly and smooth-talking, but when they offered to adopt Shiron and give him noble status, he'd refused without hesitation, saying he'd never forget his roots. Klumph burst out laughing again. The whole thing seemed ridiculous to him. The headmaster hadn't expected Shiron to understand the law of cause and effect so deeply. Klumph agreed. Nothing happened without a reason, yet so many people still missed that logic. Opportunities could come from anywhere, anytime. But if someone didn't know their own roots, they'd lose everything. And they should never compromise on what they believed was true. Didn't that mindset sound just like the headmaster in his younger days? But the headmaster felt that refusing to compromise made it too easy to judge others. And that was dangerous. Klumph figured the headmaster still hadn't forgiven himself. Whatever mistake he'd made, it clearly haunted him. Klumph reassured him he should let it go. After all, he'd guided so many talented young mages. The headmaster disagreed. He trained those kids precisely so they wouldn't follow his path and repeat his past horrors. Klumph kept insisting the headmaster was a genius who'd found his way back to the right path. The headmaster walked to the window, staring at the vast world outside while thinking about Shiron. Klumph told him to just accept Shiron already. This was fate. Who'd have thought the kid they met 4 years ago would return like this? The headmaster laughed. He didn't believe in fate, but in his heart, he couldn't deny it felt like destiny had brought Shiron back to them. Turning to Klumph with a serious look, the headmaster firmly decided to enroll Shiron into the academy. 3 months later, on a beautiful spring day, a noble's carriage arrived at Shiron's home. Now 17, Shiron said his goodbyes, ready to leave for the academy. He hugged his mom, Olina, promising to write often. When his dad, Vincent, tried to kiss him, Shiron dodged it. Vincent hugged him instead, wishing him success. Outside, Vincent mentioned how the Ojin family kept sending money despite their refusals. Temuran was there, waiting to escort Shiron to the academy. After boarding the carriage, Shiron waved one last time, and they set off. Hours later, they arrived. Shiron stared at his dream academy in awe. He couldn't look away. He'd never imagined actually attending as a mage. Temuran told him not to worry about costs. All he had to do was study hard. Shiron genuinely thanked Temuran for everything. He'd never forget his kindness. Temuran warned that no matter how high a commoner soared, they'd never match nobles. At the academy, many nobles would look down on him. With fatherly concern, Temuran advised him to endure. It'd all work out in the end. Shiron expected mockery, but Temuran surprised him with warmth. Inside the academy, Temuran excused himself. Shiron thanked him again before he left. Scanning the halls, Shiron searched for his guide. A class board caught his eye. Alpheas Academy split studies into 10 tiers, each with its own difficulty. His jaw dropped when he saw only 10 students graduated yearly. Suddenly, someone called his name from behind. Turning, he recognized the headmaster from years ago. Respectfully, Shiron greeted him, saying he remembered. As they walked, the headmaster explained he'd take an entrance exam to determine his class. The headmaster asked if Shiron had unlocked the spirit zone yet. He quietly regretted not teaching him sooner. Before the exam, the headmaster gave him a campus tour. Shiron gaped at a student flipping book pages with magic. He was mesmerized by others practicing spells everywhere. Some floated mid-air. Others debated theories he couldn't follow. The sheer difference between this world and his old life stunned him. Before he could process it all, boom! An explosion rocked the hallway. A girl had botched a spell chant. Shiron blinked as students ignored it like it was normal. As they moved on, a red-haired girl passed by. Every guy nearby swooned over her beauty appearance. The principal led him toward the academy's student ranking board, where names of top performers were displayed. His eyes landed on the first-place spot for the middle class, taken by a girl named Amy Carmus. Shiron felt like he'd heard that name before, but he brushed the thought aside. Right then, he made up his mind to try cracking the academy's top ranks himself. One of Amy's friends suddenly called out to her, and Shiron glanced toward the girl being addressed. He froze. Amy was the same person he'd met years ago. It blew his mind that the top-ranked student had such a terrible personality. Memories of being bullied by her gang 4 years ago came rushing back. And now, here she was, the star of Alpheas Magic Academy's middle class. Amy's gaze flickered toward Shiron for a split second. Her friend hurried after her, not wanting to fall behind. Shiron quickly looked away, hoping Amy wouldn't recognize him. In the end, they just passed each other without a word. Though, unbeknownst to him, Amy's friend had noticed Shiron and was instantly smitten. Amy agreed with her friend's comment but couldn't shake the feeling she'd seen Shiron somewhere before. Her friend found it weird. Amy had never shown interest in any guy until now. Amy denied it, insisting she just recognized his face. Meanwhile, the other boys could only stare in awe at Amy's stunning figure as she walked away. Little did they know, Shiron was the only one who knew about her dark past. After a short walk, they finally reached the testing hall. A group of younger students was already there, waiting for their turn. The principal told Shiron to observe how the kids handled their exams. 5 instructors stood ready to guide and evaluate the test takers, who'd step into a prepared circle to measure their spirit zone. Inside the spirit zone, floating letters would appear on the ground, helping gauge their strength, flexibility, and type. All Shiron had to do was answer the instructor's questions honestly. Simple enough, he thought. One examiner started the kid's test with a series of questions. Then, the kid closed his eyes and successfully entered his spirit zone. The instructor asked him to call out the farthest letter he could see. The kid answered 6, and the examiners quickly jotted it down. The principal explained that 6 meant the kid's spirit zone had a 6-meter diameter. The kid added that everything looked red, confirming his spirit zone's color. The instructor nodded. Red meant a divergent type, suited for high-volume energy output. Next came tests for visual clarity and temperature sensitivity. Once done, the examiners dismissed the kid with some praise. One female teacher remarked how talented this year's batch was, and the male instructor beside her agreed. Then, they called Shiron's name. The principal gave him a firm nod, urging him to go all out. The examiners had written Shiron off before he even started. Some kid who got in through the principal's connections using the Ogent family name. The female instructor figured if he had no talent, he'd just become another dropout. The male tester started with the most basic question: could Shiron even use magic? Shiron's answer didn't help his case. He admitted he'd never formally studied magic. The principal felt that familiar pang of regret. 4 years ago, he could have changed everything for this kid. The instructor's voice dripped with skepticism as he questioned whether Shiron stood any chance of entering a spirit zone at all. Without any grand claims, Shiron simply stated he would attempt it. The instructors exchanged relieved glances. At least this wasn't some blatant case of favoritism. Then Shiron closed his eyes, and something incredible happened. His spirit zone activated. A brilliant blue light exploded from his body, radiating magical energy so intense it made the air hum. Inside the zone, Shiron saw more symbols and letters than should have been possible. The instructor told him to call out the furthest number he could see. Silence. The examiner had to call Shiron's name twice before getting any response. Some teachers assumed embarrassment. The female instructor just raised an eyebrow. The principal stepped in, assuring Shiron this wasn't about grades, just honesty. Finally, Shiron spoke. He saw numbers all right, but too many to possibly count. The frustrated instructor told him to stop looking and start feeling the magic instead. Shiron tried to explain he was feeling it, but the numbers kept growing endlessly. Now annoyed, the tester snapped that Shiron should just read the first damn number he saw. Inside that impossible spirit zone, the numbers stretched to infinity, except for one. 3.14, Shiron said, and the room went dead silent. The female instructor blinked. They hadn't programmed pi into the test parameters. Shiron checked again, but there it was, clear as day in glowing blue. Only one explanation fit. Shiron's spirit zone exceeded their maximum measurable range, probably over 30 meters. The next question is, what color dominated his zone? He described seeing nothing but blue, a single, all-encompassing blue that filled his entire awareness. Now the instructors were completely lost. Blue meant convergent type, which should have been small and focused, not this monstrosity. Now the principal understood Klumph's desperation to enroll this kid. This wasn't just talent, this was something other. Another instructor asked about the floating orbs in his zone. Shiron didn't need to count. He could feel every single one of those glowing spheres. 867, he said, and the examiner's hands started shaking. That number broke every record, defying all their understanding of magic physics. 867 orbs meant 86.7% density, a concentration of power that should have been impossible. A chill ran down the principal's spine. This wasn't promising. This was downright terrifying. The female teacher suddenly broke into a cold sweat, realizing something unsettling. She couldn't help but wonder just how cold Shiron was feeling right then. Shiron replied that it was freezing, enough to almost numb him, which lined up exactly with what the teacher had suspected. Without wasting time, she jotted down the test results on the evaluation sheet. The instructor then politely told Shiron to wait outside while they finalized his class placement. Once Shiron and the other students had left, the room grew quiet. The instructors immediately started discussing the weirdness surrounding Shiron. Nothing like this had ever happened with a student before. The fact that Shiron hadn't used any reinforcement magic at all was downright unbelievable. The kinda clueless male instructor even suspected Shiron was lying. A 17-year-old who couldn't cast spells but had a 90% density and a 30-meter spirit zone? That made zero sense. The smarter female teacher shut that down fast. Why would a kid lie on an entrance exam? Plus, he'd just fail later if he didn't actually know anything. Outside, the younger students stared at Shiron, making him feel awkward under their gaze. The teacher added that pi was classified as an error code. No student would fake that just for attention. The headmaster asked where they should place him. The female teacher pushed for class 5 so Shiron could start learning magic as soon as possible. But the dense male instructor objected. That guy insisted on putting him in the beginner class since he couldn't even use magic yet. Annoyed, the female teacher snarked that not all students were as slow as him, which ticked the guy off. Soon, they were in a full-blown argument, with the man accusing her of just wanting to teach Shiron herself. But the other instructors sided with Thad, the stubborn guy, suggesting a step-by-step approach in Class 10. The wiser instructor worried Shiron would lose motivation stuck in boring basics and proposed Class 7 instead. He told the headmaster they could monitor his progress and bump him up if he excelled. If Shiron surpassed expectations, he could even skip grades. The headmaster considered it. Finally, he agreed. Shiron would go to Class 7. It was explained that Alpheas Magic Academy had 10 tiers. Levels 10 to 8 were basics, focusing on spirit zone development. Levels 7 to 4 covered advanced magic theory and application. The final tier was for training professional mages through hands-on practice. The next morning at Alpheas, all eyes were on Shiron as he joined his new class. The students couldn't stop staring at the new kid who'd skipped straight to intermediate level. They whispered about how wild it was that he'd bypassed the lower ranks entirely. Shiron introduced himself, trying to play it cool. The mixed reactions threw him off, making the vibe a little awkward. Still, he was pumped. His journey as a mage was officially starting. The Alpheas Magic Academy sprawled across a 75 mountain with 33 buildings and 40 training rooms. Classes ended at 5 p.m., after which students could do whatever they wanted. Most hung out at the 24-hour library. Some even formed research clubs to geek out over magic. Right now, Shiron was grinding through material, struggling to catch up. But his hard work paid off. He was keeping pace so far. When class ended, he realized he had no idea where the next one, Spirit Zone practice, was held. He tapped the girl in front of him for directions. Maria, a shy type, jumped a little when Shiron spoke to her. She explained it was a combined class held twice a week. Once they reached the training building, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone was fawning over Amy. Some asked for autographs, others just stared. Shiron watched her from his seat, figuring she'd probably advance to the final tier soon. Suddenly, the teacher, a level 6 Spirit Zone specialist named Ethella, greeted the class. After a quick intro, she acknowledged the new student joining today, All eyes snapped to Shiron, and he squirmed a little. Ethella gestured for him to introduce himself, which made it even more awkward. He stood up and mumbled his name to the room. Amy and her friend watched him from the back. Her friend gushed about recognizing Shiron earlier, thrilled to finally know his name. Amy, though, stayed quiet. The name didn't ring a bell, but his face, it bugged her. Then it hit her. He was the kid she'd seen getting jumped in that alley. That signature blonde hair was a dead giveaway. Amy's hands shook, like fate was playing some messed up joke on her. The Karmas family had a reputation for being geniuses, all thanks to their signature red-eyed trait. That ability let them see things crystal clear, like a mirror, and grasp the deepest essence of stuff, basically making studying pointless. The youngest Karmas daughter, Amy Karmas, was the biggest prodigy of them all. She could pick up anything crazy fast and nail it perfectly. Sounds awesome, but the downside, everything being so easy just bored her to death, and she ended up hating pretty much everything. She'd sneak out all the time, doing her own thing without dropping the Karmas name, hanging with street thugs, watching them brawl. That was her idea of fun. At first, it was thrilling, but even that got old real quick. Then something finally sparked her excitement again. A street kid who could use magic. Yeah, that kid was Shiron. And now, that same kid was all grown up, standing in the same magic academy as her. Her two freaked out friends snapped Amy out of it. She'd been staring at him like she wanted to swallow him whole. Amy was dead sure it was Shiron. Her eyes never lied. A wave of dread hit her as ugly memories rushed back. She'd spent years burying that past and praying Shiron wouldn't recognize her. The whole mess started with a dumb misunderstanding. Shiron thought she was trying to strip him. Now she pictured him blabbing to the whole school about her shady past, about how she hung out with street gangs and supposedly tried to undress him. Lost in her panic, Amy didn't even realize she was tearing her textbook apart. No way she'd let that happen. She had to shut this down before it got worse. Class finally started, with Professor Ethella diving into a lesson on spirit zones. Spirit zones came in different types, with the first kind always forming a perfect circle, but sometimes that circular shape just didn't cut it. Ethella decided to demonstrate by conjuring an image zone. Image zones were basically training wheels, a way to visualize spirit zones clearly. She explained that circular spirit zones were pretty useless in real fights. Like, if her zone was 10 meters wide, but the enemy was outside that range, total waste. To prove her point, Ethella whipped up a fireball spell. She launched it straight at the dummy target. The fireball shot across the room, dead accurate. But the fireball instantly fizzled out the second it left the spirit zone. Magic only worked inside its range. Without missing a beat, Professor Ethella reshaped her spirit zone into a straight line, nailing the target dead on. This time, the fireball shot straight through and hit its mark. Shiron's mind was blown. He had no idea mages could tweak their spirit zones like that. But Ethella pointed out the catch. It took way too much focus to pull off. That's why mages relied on 4 preset patterns, each optimized for different situations. The most basic was the defensive type. More angles meant stronger protection. Next was the attack type, shooting straight lines in all directions, perfect for hitting many targets. Then came the cross-shaped pattern. Limited targeting, sure, but killer for moving targets since you could spin it like a turret. Last was the detached form, the toughest to master. Even level 5 mages struggled with it. The class buzzed with excitement as Ethella prepped to demo the advanced technique. She summoned a normal spirit zone, then, slowly, it began peeling away from her body, until it fully detached, floating mid-air like a rogue bubble. Shiron's brain short-circuited. Spirit zones were supposed to be mental extensions of the mage. How could it just leave her? Ethella nonchalantly maneuvered the orb around the room. Mastering this technique was crazy difficult, but the payoff made it all worth it. A mage could instantly cast any spell and chase down targets with no directional restrictions whatsoever. The students lost it, hyped by their teacher's flawless control. Suddenly, Professor Ethella called on Amy Karmas to demonstrate magic for her juniors. The class erupted in cheers. Amy's friends fist-pumped, already proud before she'd even moved. Meanwhile, Amy looked like she'd seen a ghost, panic mode activated. Attention was the last thing she wanted, especially with Shiron right there, maybe seconds away from recognizing her. Even though cross-type spirit zones had the advantage of long-range coverage, they struggled against multiple fast-moving enemies. That wasn't the case for a mage with absolute focus, though someone who could accurately pivot the zone's direction. Right now, Amy Karmas was demonstrating exactly that under Instructor Ethella's orders. No surprise, the students were impressed by Amy's skill. Shiron was no exception. It fueled his determination to catch up to his own lagging abilities. Amy kept spinning, firing off fireballs at every target around her like it was nothing. Her calm, confident demeanor only made her more mesmerizing to watch. One guy even daydreamed about dating her, only to get roasted by the girls nearby, which just made Shiron even more confused. Why would someone like Amy hang around with the thugs? After a while, Amy wrapped up her demonstration. Her gaze suddenly locked onto Shiron, sharp, intense, like she was staring right through him. The moment Shiron noticed, uneasy feelings settled in his gut. Other students caught Amy stealing glances at the new kid too, making the whole thing even more suspicious. But deep down, Amy was panicking. She hadn't meant to look his way at all. Now, whispers spread about what kind of history those two might have. Still, that one look was enough. Both of them knew. They remembered each other. Amy's mind spiraled with random, half-formed thoughts about Shiron. Next thing she knew, her face was burning red, and her friend totally noticed. Once Instructor Ethella's lesson ended, the class split up for timed practice sessions. The 7th class started with defense forms, going through the basics first. Shiron planned to deploy his spirit zone like usual. Then he'd slowly shape it into a defense form step by step, so it wouldn't collapse. Out of nowhere, he felt this weird certainty, like he'd already succeeded. To test it, he asked Instructor Ethella if he could use the image zone. She agreed, but warned him to stay calm, even if it was his first time. Meanwhile, students whispered about Shiron's guts to practice in front of everyone. Even Amy's friend nudged her to watch. Amy choked mid-sip and jerked her head toward him, her weird reaction making her friend side-eye her. Shiron stood in the center of the image zone, eyes shut, focusing to enter his spirit zone. When he opened them, boom! A circular spirit zone exploded outward around him, way faster than expected. Everyone gaped at the insane size of it. The zone's diameter kept climbing on the measurement indicator. Shiron vaguely remembered his entrance exam, but couldn't recall the instructor ever mentioning his zone's range. He forced it to stop, worried it'd cause problems if it grew any larger. Even then, it had already hit a 20-meter diameter. The 5th class were shook. Average zones maxed out at 13 meters. Shiron tried compressing it into a defense form, just like he'd planned, except it backfired. His zone destabilized, on the verge of collapsing. Amy and her 4th class friends doubted he'd pull it off in one try. Shiron analyzed his mistake, wondering if the visual feedback threw him off, but then it hit him. He'd weakened his focus by suppressing the zone's size. So this time, he went all out, letting his spirit zone expand naturally. It kept growing and growing until the other students started freaking out. Amy just let out this awkward laugh, because honestly, what even was that size? By the time it stopped expanding, Shiron's spirit zone had reached a staggering 41-meter diameter. Now all that was left was for Shiron to compressing it into a defense form. Slowly but surely, the zone shrank, condensing into the shape he wanted. This time, the other students were straight up impressed. Against all odds, Shiron had nailed a perfect defense form on his first real attempt. Instructor Ethella looked thrilled, totally not expecting that kind of result. Amy's friend was now low-key crushing on Shiron and asked Amy what she thought, but Amy's expression had gone dark, her weird mood swings confusing her friend even more. After seeing Shiron's progress, Amy changed her plans. She'd confront him, quietly, without anyone noticing. Ethella had always assumed Shiron spent his whole life training in the mountains. That's why he was so ridiculously talented when it came to omnipotence. Shiron could feel his spirit zone shrinking down to something tiny compared to its original size. Ethella confirmed it, but pointed out that even though it was smaller, its density had skyrocketed. With that kind of density, His spirit zone could tank both physical attacks and mental magic. She gave him props for a job well done and told him to step back. The other students cheered, hyping up Shiron's genius like he was some kind of prodigy. The praise made him so embarrassed he practically bolted off the stage. Ethella finally understood why the other teachers were so obsessed with him. From now on, she'd be keeping a close eye on his progress too. Of course, Shiron's little performance didn't just disappear. It sparked all kinds of reactions among the students. Some were genuinely impressed. Others straight up admired him. A few were just salty. And then there were those who stared at him with creepy, unreadable expressions. The next morning at Alpheas Magic Academy, someone else had Shiron in their crosshairs, the female examiner from before. She walked into class, only to get bombarded by students begging for gossip about her first love story. Turns out, the class she walked into was Shiron's. Her name was Siena, a 6th-tier mage who specialized in ice magic. Shiron had no idea she was actually the homeroom teacher for Class 5. The only reason she was teaching Class 7 is that she wanted to personally mentor him. She was still fuming at Thad for blocking Shiron from joining Class 5. With sheer determination, she was going to fast-track him straight into her class. The intensity of her stare sent a chill down Shiron's spine. He doubted that look was meant for him. The students kept pushing, asking if the rumors about Siena and Thad dating were true. The question made her visibly disgusted. In response, she summoned ice magic, forming a crystal right in her palm. She threw the question back at the class, waiting to see if anyone could explain the theory behind it. Dead silence. The air turned frigid, frost creeping over the windows. Students shivered, but Siena just kept lecturing like nothing was wrong. There was no such thing as cold energy in this world, just temperature going up or down. Hit absolute zero, and that's when things got real. By pulling even a little energy from the room, ice magic could take form, but break it down into tiny particles and create convection currents. The temp would drop so fast it could kill, exactly what they'd just experienced. The class sat there, realizing how close they'd come to freezing to death. Then Professor Siena dropped the real knowledge, how mages could absorb all that energy. Inside a spirit zone, a mage could control everything: space, energy, even the rules. Limited range, but total dominance. They could sense everything inside it: light, scent, physical feeling. But to activate magic, two conditions had to be met. It was omnipotence and omniscience. Omniscience was the knowledge needed to cast. Omnipotence was raw talent, the power to make it happen. Shiron froze. It was like she'd handed him the missing puzzle piece he'd been searching for. Siena drove it home. A spirit zone was only part of the equation. The rest is endless study. Without hard work, there was no way to become a great mage. A piece of advice that felt like it was meant specifically for Shiron. He stayed quiet, emotions tangled, but one thing burned brighter than ever: his resolve to become a true mage. Siena's lecture had just lit a new path. Now he knew exactly what to do. Later that afternoon, after classes ended, Shiron headed to the library alone, ready to hit the books. He was exhausted from pulling all-nighters to catch up, but he couldn't help it. Learning magic was addicting. Suddenly, his feet left the ground. He was floating. Someone had just snatched him up, yanking him away from campus. Next thing he knew, he was deep in the woods, far from the academy. They dumped him hard, sending him face first into the dirt, his books scattering everywhere. The kidnapper threw off their cloak, revealing Amy Carmus, the girl he'd met before. He'd expected to see her again, just not this soon. She summoned fire in her palm, clearly trying to scare him. Amy started sweating nervously, second-guessing whether she should go through with her attack. Shiron's expression threw her off. He wasn't glaring at her like she expected. It was nothing like the sharp look he had 5 years ago. Shiron calmly told her he remembered everything from that day 5 years ago, including the part where he tried to strip her. Amy immediately flushed with embarrassment and cut him off before he could say more. She stumbled over her words, trying to explain it was all a misunderstanding. She insisted she wasn't some perverted woman like he thought. Shiron just stared at her with a confused, almost silly expression, not getting what she meant. Amy clarified that it was the street thugs who wanted to undress. She never said anything like that herself. Her nerves spiked when Shiron pointed out how her own words back then had basically encouraged them. An awkward silence settled between them. Shiron finally caught on. Amy was just trying to keep rumors from spreading at the academy. He stood up and told her that if she was really sorry, she should just apologize. He knew how much influence he had as the top-ranked student, but that didn't change what had already happened. To him, it was simple. If you messed up, you owned up to it. But Amy took it the wrong way, thinking Shiron was trying to pressure her into submission. She snapped back, mocking his arrogance, as if she'd ever apologized to some commoner. Shiron was baffled by how full of herself she was acting. Amy coldly said apologizing to him was pointless. He'd probably just used the rumor against her anyway. Shiron, still naive, thought apologizing was just the decent thing to do. Amy laughed in his face, telling him the real world didn't work like that. She warned him about the academy's hierarchy. If she turned the seniors against him, even his classmates would ditch him. And as a commoner, he'd be lucky not to get expelled. Shiron hadn't expected her to be this desperate to silence him, but Amy just smirked, teasing him. She was only testing how far she could push him. She ordered him to bring her coffee every day from now on. Then, seeing his helpless look, she piled it on. For a commoner, getting into a noble academy was a big deal, and it'd be a shame if he lost that. Amy felt like she'd won, finally putting Shiron in his place. Shiron reluctantly agreed. If this was what it took to earn her trust, fine. Amy felt a smug satisfaction, praising what she saw as his smart choice to comply. With one last smug look, she reminded him not to snitch to the teachers. Amy walked off without giving Shiron another glance. He knew it wasn't fair, but still better than getting kicked out. The next day at Alpheas Magic Academy's courtyard, students watched as Shiron carried a cup of coffee toward Amy. He handed it over awkwardly, his face burning with embarrassment. Amy's friends couldn't believe this new kid was trying to get close to her, while she just gave him a cold stare. Amy was pleased he kept his word. She took the coffee but made a show of pointing out how much had spilled on the floor. Then she turned and left, deliberately humiliating him. And it worked. Shiron's face turned red with shame. Soon, whispers spread about how Amy had rejected him. Her friends actually felt bad for Shiron, thinking he had a crush, but Amy shut that down fast. Secretly, she was thrilled. Watching him squirm was way more fun than she expected. Meanwhile, her friends misunderstood, assuming she was flattered by his attention. Shiron wasn't having it. This was straight-up bullying, and he needed a plan. He clenched his fists, refusing to let anger take over. If he was stuck playing this game, he'd play it flawlessly. 10 days later, students were still buzzing about the romance between Shiron and Amy. But unlike day one, Shiron now walked up to her with confidence, coffee in hand. Some girls even envied Amy, impressed by his persistence. Amy loved the growing audience, more witnesses to his humiliation. Then her friend Sharelle suddenly asked when she'd finally accept Shiron as her boyfriend. Amy was baffled. Why would she ever date him? Sharelle explained the rumors. Amy, who never glanced at guys, was now happily accepting coffee from Shiron daily. The whole school was waiting for her to quote, confess her feelings. Amy was stunned. Shiron handed her the coffee with a look so sincere it could melt ice. The crowd cheered, egging Amy on to accept his love. Shiron even joked that this time, not a single drop had spilled. Amy's emotions exploded. Embarrassment, frustration, and fury all tangled together. Amy was seriously annoyed this time, so much that she deliberately knocked the coffee Shiron had brought for her right out of his hand. The whole class was stunned by Amy's harsh behavior, including Sharelle. Amy lashed out at Shiron, scolding him for slacking off instead of studying and wasting his time chasing girls. She stormed off, telling him not to bother bringing her coffee ever again. Sharelle awkwardly apologized for her friend's attitude, while Shiron just stood there, head down. Shiron quietly picked up the fallen coffee cup, and the other students felt bad for him, starting to blame Amy for being so cruel. He walked away, still looking down, and everyone assumed he was heartbroken. But secretly, he was actually relieved, finally free from Amy's bullying. That night in the Alpheas Magic Academy library, Amy was a mess, her thoughts all over the place, and her focus gone. She had meant to humiliate Shiron, But now the rumors were turning against her instead, which just ticked her off. She activated the red-eye ability of the Karmas family. It let her replay past events in her memory with crystal clear detail. Shiron's reaction on the first day had been exactly what she wanted, satisfying even. But after that, his expression had changed completely, like he was genuinely sincere and determined. In her memory, she analyzed everything: his posture, movements, facial expressions, emotions, even the look in his eyes. Nothing was off. It was terrifying. Either Shiron could control his emotions like a robot, or he was actually being sincere the whole time. Amy slammed her book shut and headed for the dorm. Sharelle offered to walk with her, but Amy brushed her off. She just wanted to rest, exhausted from everything that had happened. As she pushed open the library door, a male student was waiting for her. His name was Jake Artius, and he greeted her smoothly. Amy sneered and asked what he wanted. Jake took the chance to badmouth Shiron, calling him shameless for chasing after her. Amy figured Jake was just there to laugh at her, but then he offered her a cup of high-quality, ridiculously expensive coffee. Amy was confused. Jake admitted he wanted to get closer to her, claiming he was way more worthy than some poor guy like Shiron. Amy was instantly disgusted, thinking he had to be joking. She knew Jake's crew had been watching her, waiting for a chance to take her down. Jake tried to explain the misunderstanding, annoyed at how rude Amy was being. But Amy didn't care. She mocked him, saying his only power came from his rich family name. That set Jake off. He decided it was time to teach her a lesson. He threatened to make the Karmas family suffer using his family's connections. Amy just laughed, saying his eyes looked like rotten fish, nothing like Shiron's. Hearing that he wasn't even on Shiron's level, Jake switched targets. He'd destroy Shiron instead, making sure he'd never be able to use magic again. Amy's expression changed instantly, her anger flaring. She dumped Jake's coffee on the floor. Her arrogance pushed Jake over the edge. But Amy wasn't backing down either. Her Spirit Zone crossform was already locked onto Jake. With killer intent radiating off her, she demanded to know who he planned to hurt. Jake trembled, reminding her about the Academy's no magic rule. Amy mocked him again, saying his answer was exactly what a coward would say. Not like Shiron, who never relied on anyone else. Without realizing it, she defended Shiron, saying he owned up to his actions and would surpass Jake in no time. Amy used her magic to flood the oxygen around Jake. If he tried casting now, it'd blow up in his face instantly. Knowing he was outmatched, Jake ran off, throwing out the classic loser's threat on his way. Amy slumped against the wall, drained. It had been a while since she'd felt this fired up. She didn't even know why she'd defended Shiron. She doubted he'd even show up tomorrow. But still, she was weirdly grateful to him. Thanks to him, her mind felt clear again. The next day at Alpheas Magic Academy, things felt oddly tense. As classes wrapped up, Shiron walked out, his mind still chewing over the lessons he'd just learned. He could only sigh in resignation as whispers about Amy rejecting him still floated among the students. Out of nowhere, he spotted Sharelle walking alone. No Amy in sight, which was weird. Shiron called out to her from behind, trying to be casual. But Sharelle's reaction was anything but normal. She screamed like she'd just seen a ghost. Panicked, she immediately asked where Amy was, leaving Shiron totally confused. Then Sharelle shoved a threatening letter in his face, one meant for Amy. The note demanded Amy go to Training Area 14 if she wanted Shiron to stay unharmed, claiming he'd been kidnapped. The culprits was a group called the Black Magicians, formed by Jake's gang. Shiron pressed Sharelle for details about them. Rewinding to 30 minutes earlier, some random student had handed Amy a letter, warning her to drop her arrogant attitude. Amy and Sharelle ignored it at first, brushing past the guy like he was nothing. But when he mentioned Shiron, Amy spun around and snatched the letter from his hands. After reading it, she realized it was a ransom note. Shiron had supposedly been taken. Amy already knew who was behind it. Jake had threatened to go after Shiron before. Still, she crumpled the letter and tossed it aside, acting like Shiron meant nothing to her. The messenger didn't care about her reaction. He just delivered the message and bounced. Sharelle freaked out over Shiron's kidnapping, but couldn't figure out why Amy was involved. She begged Amy to report this to the professors. Amy admitted that was the smart move, but getting the faculty involved would just expose their secrets. They'd be interrogated, and everything, including Shiron's commoner status, would come out. Plus, they'd find out Shiron wasn't even supposed to be here. Memories of Shiron being bullied flashed through Amy's mind. She remembered the sheer determination he'd shown, even humiliating himself just to earn her trust. She could practically feel how hard he'd fought for his spot at the academy. Amy made up her mind. She was going after Shiron. She shoved her bag at Sharelle. Then she ordered Sharelle to alert the professors if she wasn't back by 7 p.m. Back in the present, Shiron couldn't believe cold-hearted Amy was actually trying to save him. Shaking off his shock, he demanded the location from Sharelle. He had to catch up to Amy. He figured Amy hadn't reported this to protect their secrets. But if she was going alone, there was only one reason: to keep his secret safe. Without wasting another second, Shiron took off running. Then that weird floating sensation hit him again. Turns out Sharelle had grabbed him. No way he'd make it in time on foot. She told him to hold on tight, which was awkward since there was nothing to hold on to except her. Sharelle summoned a bright teleportation spell. Shiron's body lit up as the photonization process kicked in. Next thing he knew, they were blasting through the air at light speed, Shiron screaming the whole way. In minutes, they were closing in on the destination. Unfortunately, Sharelle had to stop short. Too many tall trees meant a crash risk. When they arrived, Amy was nowhere in sight. Shiron realized they'd moved her somewhere else. Knowing how bad this was, he told Sharelle to go get the professors now. They were out of options, and Sharelle could make it back fast. Besides, Amy got captured because of him. That bombshell left Sharelle stunned. She demanded answers, shocked she'd missed something this big. Shiron shut her down. No time for explanations. Sharelle got it and bolted for help. Once she was gone, Shiron activated the spirit zone to track Amy's trail. A set of footprints led into the woods behind the training area. He followed them, but they just stopped mid-path. Realization hit. They'd used flight magic. This was a trap. Then, in the distance, a plume of smoke rose. Whatever was happening over there, it wasn't good. Turns out, the explosion Shiron had just seen came from one of the students attacking Amy. The attack had missed on purpose, just a warning shot aimed at Amy. Then, 4 more students flew toward Amy's location. They surrounded her from all sides, cutting off any escape. Jake stepped forward, greeting Amy with his usual fake cool attitude. But Amy stayed calm, sarcastically pointing out how they were wasting their time with useless actions. As always, her arrogance pissed Jake off instantly. Amy asked Jake where Shiron was, her tone sharp. They just laughed at her, mocking how she'd fallen for the fake letter, teasing that Shiron probably didn't even care about her. Their real target wasn't Shiron at all. They just wanted payback for yesterday's humiliation. But Amy's reaction caught them off guard. She smiled, and it was downright terrifying. With Shiron not around, she could slaughter them without holding back. That creepy look made Jake break out in a cold sweat. He knew she meant every word. Without hesitation, Amy blasted the blonde-haired student who'd attacked her earlier with a fire spell. The guy panicked, desperately trying to put out the flames eating at his clothes. The others thought Amy had lost it, scrambling away in fear. They cast fly spells, trying to put distance between themselves and her. But it was pointless. Amy was a genius who could track and hit them with scary precision. Another fire spell slammed straight into Jake, the explosion sending him flying backward. Amy kept bombarding them, not letting up for a second. She adjusted her aim effortlessly, matching every move they made. They tried splitting up to throw her off, but that didn't work either. Amy could target them all at once. Without hesitation, she rained fireball spells down on them. The students dodged frantically, cursing Jake for underestimating Amy's strength. Jake wasn't done yet. He circled behind Amy and unleashed a windcutter spell. The attack shot toward her from her blind spot, fast and deadly. Jake was sure this time he'd finish her off, but Amy sensed it coming and dodged easily using schema, smirking the whole time. She mocked him for relying on the same stupid tactics over and over. Then, she shifted into the spirit zone, locking onto Jake. A fireball spell hit him square in the face, exploding mid-air. Jake seethed, he'd barely survived by activating defense form. Amy kept taunting him, saying his trash skills couldn't even kill an ant. Cornered, Jake finally resorted to forbidden magic. Amy, still oblivious, kept laughing at his pathetic efforts. Then, out of nowhere, a strange wave of energy disrupted her senses. It felt like her brain was being shredded from the inside, pain shooting through her skull. Jake's friends joined in, hitting her with the same cursed spell. That's when she realized they were using anti-magic, a forbidden technique. Suddenly, her arms got bound by wind magic, paralyzing her. The spell left her helpless, unable to fight back. Jake finally felt satisfied, thinking he'd won. He pulled out a small knife, planning to ruin her pretty face so no guy would chase after her again. Amy panicked, struggling uselessly against the magic holding her down. As the blade inched closer to her face, she shut her eyes, resigned to her fate, finally understanding how little Shiron must have felt when she bullied him. Just then, a voice shouted at them to stop. It was Shiron, arriving right on time, gripping an ordinary wooden stick. Jake couldn't help but laugh at Shiron's reckless decision to show up alone. Amy, who'd been worried sick about him, also chewed him out for charging in to help like that. Shiron was totally confused seeing Amy, someone he thought was strong, getting overpowered by those bully students. But he was determined to buy time until the professors arrived, no matter what. Shiron stepped forward, gripping his wooden staff, ready to face them. Jake, though, just smirked and told his buddies to hit Shiron with that forbidden anti-magic spell. Just like Amy, Shiron started feeling the effects. His head throbbed like it was about to split open. The pain was too much, and he crumpled to the ground, barely holding on. Amy's heart raced seeing Shiron helpless like that. She yelled at him to get out of the spirit zone, quickly explaining how the anti-magic worked. Shiron's consciousness was fading fast. If he didn't act now, he'd black out. Then, suddenly, he remembered Ethella's lessons about defense form, a technique that is able to block mental attacks. Anti-magic was basically a mental assault, messing with focus and disrupting the spirit zone. So Shiron figured if he could compress his spirit zone enough, the anti-magic wouldn't penetrate it. A blue glow pulsed around him as he fought through the agony. Amy begged him to stop, terrified he'd die if he pushed himself too hard. But against all odds, Shiron actually pulled it off. His spirit zone became so dense, the anti-magic bounced right off. He didn't stop there, though. He kept pushing, compressing his spirit zone way beyond normal limits. The anti-magic backlash hit Jake's crew instead, sending their own spell ricocheting back at them. Jake's gang freaked out, scrambling in total confusion. Shiron kept walking toward them, calm but relentless, and they panicked, screaming at him to stay back. But it was too late. The reflected anti-magic hit them point blank, knocking them out cold and leaving their minds wrecked. With the spell broken, the magic binding Amy's hands dissolved too. She was stunned, staring at Shiron in disbelief. His spirit zone control was insane. She couldn't wrap her head around what she'd just witnessed. It was unreal. Jake, now injured, was straight up terrified, convinced Shiron was some kind of monster for taking on 6 guys at once. All his buddies were already down, unconscious on the ground. Jake, still thinking Shiron was only good at defense, tried to challenge him with an attack spell instead. He activated his spirit zone, aiming straight for Shiron's body. His signature move, Wind Cutter, was about to slash through the air, except before he could even cast it, a fist smashed into his face. Hard. Turned out, that punch came from Amy, who'd had enough of Jake's cowardly crap. The force, boosted by her schema, sent him flying, but she wasn't done. She stormed over and kept wailing on him, all her pent-up rage over how he'd treated her, and Shiron just exploded. Jake's face was a mess, swollen, bloody, barely recognizable. Shiron tried to stop her, but Amy wasn't listening. Worried things would go too far, Shiron grabbed Amy and yanked her away from Jake. They both tumbled to the ground, and Shiron checked on Amy, but she wasn't responding. Thinking she'd passed out, he shook her gently, trying to wake her up. It turned out Shiron realized Amy wasn't actually unconscious. She was just exhausted. Shiron sincerely thanked Amy for trying to save him, his gratitude genuine. Suddenly, Amy stood up, claiming she felt completely refreshed. Blushing a little, Amy suggested they head back before the professors found out about the whole mess. But Shiron admitted they'd already reported the incident earlier. That made Amy groan. Mages only believed logical explanations, and the professors would definitely grill them for every detail. From their conversation, Jake picked up that Amy and Shiron were hiding something. Just as expected, a streak of purple light shot toward them from a distance. Before they could react, the light was right in front of them, leaving no chance to escape. Amy hoped it'd be some wise old professors who'd let a little scuffle slide. But her hopes crashed when she saw the two strictest professors approaching. Sharelle immediately checked on Amy, while Professor Thad scanned the area. Thad cast a spell called Fire Sun to light up the surroundings. His eyes widened when he saw so many students knocked out cold. He demanded an explanation from Amy, his star student, on how she got tangled in this chaos. Meanwhile, Professor Siena looked annoyed that Thad only cared about Amy. Siena marched up to Shiron and ordered him to explain the situation, but Jake stepped in, volunteering to tell the whole story himself. Jake admitted he held a grudge against Amy, acting like it was just normal teenage drama. Siena wasn't fooled. She had proof of the threatening letters sent to Amy. Plus, she'd seen Jake using forbidden anti-magic spells. Jake argued that Amy's power was too strong anyway, and that he was the real victim here. Then he shifted blame, making Shiron and Amy look suspicious for not reporting things right away. He even accused them of hiding some shady secret. Amy was furious at Jake's underhanded tactics. Jake told Amy and Shiron to spill the truth right then and there. In his head, Jake plotted to expose their secret no matter the cost. Money wasn't an issue. But Siena cut off his scheming thoughts, walking toward him with a glare. The fact that Jake and his crew used forbidden magic to attack other students was enough to expel him. Arrogant as ever, Jake doubted Siena even had the authority to kick him out. Thad nervously reminded Siena about Jake's family being the Academy's biggest donors. Siena snapped back, telling Thad to quit teaching if he couldn't stand by his students. Thad just covered his face in shame. Jake kept threatening to get Siena fired, but she just summoned her ice magic. Still smug, Jake acted like money could fix anything. As she prepared her spells, Siena taught Jake a lesson about things money can't buy. Then she unleashed her ice magic straight at him. The freezing, unbreakable ice encased Jake's entire body. He couldn't move an inch, pure terror gripping him beyond words. Siena finally released the spell, letting him go. The Academy knew all about Jake's crimes but hadn't punished him. Siena asked if he knew why. Jake scoffed, saying it was obviously because of his family's money. But Siena shut that down. The Academy didn't teach him for cash. It taught him something money couldn't buy. Something like his dream of becoming a mage. Wasn't that why he came here? Those words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He remembered first meeting Siena, vowing to be a great mage. Then his childhood, when friends followed him, all chasing the same dream. Finally waking up, Jake dropped to his knees and apologized. For real this time. He begged Siena to guide him again. That night marked the end of the Black Magician Association and the start of redemption for those who found their way back. The next morning, just as Amy predicted, she and Shiron got called to the faculty room. Professor Thad was waiting to interrogate them about not reporting the incident sooner. The professors pressured them to tell the full truth. Amy and Shiron exchanged a silent look. With a sigh, Amy finally spoke up. She'd come clean. Shiron knew they couldn't hide this forever either. Amy's voice turned deep and serious as she said, "The truth is, Shiron is." Then her expression flipped to cheerful as she blurted out that Shiron was actually her boyfriend. The professors and Sharelle were stunned, jaws dropping in total disbelief. The scene replayed like something out of a dramatic retelling. Amy, trapped helplessly by the swirling wind magic, completely at its mercy, her only hope being that someone, anyone, would come to her rescue. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, a few shady figures started closing in on her, smirking like they already knew no one would bother saving her up in the middle of nowhere. But a prince on a white horse suddenly showed up, like some kind of hero straight out of a fairy tale. The guy was Shiron, apparently, and he made quick work of those thugs, taking them all down with just one kick like it was nothing. After that, he freed Amy like some damsel in distress and straight up carried her like she was actual royalty. And just like that, his whole knight in shining armor act had Amy falling head over heels for him. Yeah, that was the story, and it spread like wildfire through the academy. The girls were eating it up, gushing over how romantic the whole thing was. And the one spreading it? None other than Sharelle herself. Sharelle backed up every detail, swearing she saw it all go down with her own eyes. But she didn't even notice Amy glaring daggers at her the whole time. In an instant, Sharelle became the target of Amy's fury once she realized exactly where all these rumors were coming from. The bulletin boards were plastered with gossip about Amy and Shiron's so-called relationship. Some were impressed, some were jealous, and some just straight up refused to believe it. Amy chewed Sharelle out for spreading nonsense, especially since her friend hadn't even been there to see what happened. But Sharelle just smirked. She didn't need to see it firsthand when Amy herself had basically confirmed the whole thing by not denying it. Either way, it all worked out in the end. Even Jake's gang stopped messing with her after that. Amy couldn't argue with the results. A few days earlier, during questioning, Professor Thad hadn't bought Amy's story at all. Shiron had just transferred to the academy, after all. Amy insisted it was true. She'd known Shiron since they were kids, and then reuniting at the academy. That was fate. She even turned to Shiron to confirm their relationship. Under the table, she kicked his leg as a not-so-subtle hint to play along if he wanted both of them to get out of this mess unscathed. Once Shiron backed her up, the instructors finally backed off, figuring it made sense that he'd rush to save her if they were that close. Sharelle was still buzzing with excitement, while Amy just got more and more uncomfortable. Today, there was a joint class, so Amy had a chance to see Shiron again. But she planned to just focus on studying like usual, which made Sharelle pout in disappointment. Amy figured she and Shiron had their own separate school lives to worry about. No need to mix things up more than they already had. That afternoon, inside the joint training building, Sharelle called out to Shiron like an overexcited fan. Shiron greeted them politely, like always. Sharelle teased him, asking if he'd missed Amy, while Amy herself felt a weird twinge of something that might have been jealousy. Amy walked over and told Shiron he could just call them by their names, no need for formalities. But Shiron refused, saying he still had to respect his seniors. Then he excused himself and headed back to his seat. Amy looked pissed, spinning on her heel and storming off. Sharelle couldn't help but think something was off about the whole dynamic. Meanwhile, the other students had started bullying Shiron out of sheer envy. They mocked him, saying he couldn't even use basic magic. It all started 2 days ago when the whole class was gossiping about Shiron and Amy's, quote, relationship. At first, it was just normal chatter, nothing serious. But then some guy decided to show off Shiron's test scores to the entire class. The guy had 30 points across the board in every subject. That was all the excuse they needed to start harassing him, accusing him of only getting into the academy through connections. The guy kept egging everyone on, making sure the whole class turned against Shiron. And sure enough, it worked. Soon, everyone was convinced Shiron didn't deserve to be there. Maria just stayed quiet, too scared to say anything. When Shiron walked into class that day, the room went dead silent. The stares he got were ice cold. He tried talking to someone like usual, but the guy just straight up ignored him and walked away. Shiron didn't even need to ask what was going on. They made sure he heard every nasty thing they said about him. Back in the present, inside the joint training building, Shiron was completely isolated, every other student avoiding him like the plague. Someone even muttered about how disgusting it was when his spirit zone accidentally brushed against theirs during training. Then Professor Ethella walked over. She asked how his deviate spirit zone training was coming along. She gave him a few pointers, trying to help him get a better handle on it. Then she asked if he wanted to try practicing in the image zone. But he hesitated when he noticed the way the other students were treating him. Shiron steeled himself to keep pushing forward toward his dream. He was going to give it his best shot. The Class 7 students shot him nasty looks, their eyes full of mockery as they watched him. There he was, Shiron, standing in front of the whole class, nerves creeping up on him. Professor Ethella told him to demonstrate all 4 forms of his spirit zone, one by one. Even the Class 4 students, including Amy and Sharelle, had their eyes glued to him now. First, Shiron kicked things off by showing off his defense form. The Class 4 kids were impressed by the 144 angles in his defense form. Even Amy was shocked. This was way stronger than when he'd fought Jake the other day. Then, flawlessly, Shiron shifted into his second form without a single mistake. Next up was the third form, a hybrid crossover style. Professor Ethella couldn't help but smile at how far he'd come. Shiron paused for a second, bracing himself to attempt the deviate form, something he'd never pulled off before. He started shaping his spirit zone, but as he tried to separate it from his body, his focus began slipping. He fought hard to keep his mind clear, but the Class 7 students deliberately laughed at him, trying to mess with his head. The taunts kept coming, ringing in the air, and bit by bit, his concentration wavered. His spirit zone started going haywire. Amy and Sharelle were confused since it had been stable just moments ago. They figured something must have happened that they didn't catch. Shiron was drowning in negative emotions now. Memories of every insult, every bit of ridicule he'd faced since childhood, flooded his mind. He couldn't understand why everyone seemed to want him to fail. Was watching him struggle really that entertaining? Out of nowhere, a voice snapped him out of it. A warning not to waste time on useless thoughts. The mysterious guy told him to focus on what needed to be done and stop doubting himself. He reminded Shiron of his goal, his dream of becoming a mage. Shiron snapped back to reality. With renewed determination, he roared that he would become a mage. Suddenly, a surge of energy burst from him, stabilizing his spirit zone again. The Class 4 students were blown away by the sudden turnaround. Then, with everything he had, Shiron forced his spirit zone to separate from his body. He screamed, fighting to keep his mind from collapsing. Meanwhile, Professor Siena was busy reviewing the Black Magician faction's violations. She still couldn't believe Shiron's mental strength had matched 6 Class 5 students. Out of nowhere, someone came looking for her. It turned out it was Professor Ethella, reporting that Shiron had finally pulled off the deviate form. His deviate form spirit zone actually worked, even if it only lasted 4 seconds. Professor Siena felt smug about being right about Shiron, while Ethella had a favor to ask. Siena already knew what Ethella wanted and agreed to handle it. A few days later, during Professor Siena's chemistry lecture, she wrapped up the lesson and told the students to take good notes. Then she dropped a bombshell announcement. She called Shiron to stand up, and just like that, she declared he was skipping 2 grades straight to Class 5. One of the girls in class immediately lost it. She couldn't accept it. She yelled about how Shiron, who couldn't even cast a single spell, didn't deserve this. Professor Siena was baffled and asked Shiron if it was true. Under the weight of everyone's glares, Shiron admitted he really couldn't use magic, but Siena backed him up. Since Class 6 wasn't about spells anyway, it shouldn't matter. The guy who'd been the ringleader of Shiron's bullies stood up, furious. He accused Siena of nepotism and favoritism. Soon, the whole class joined in, protesting loudly. Siena sighed and decided to call a faculty meeting to settle things. Back in her office, Professor Siena was still mulling over what happened. Then, a student walked in. It was Maria, and she had something to say about the whole mess. Maria finally opened up about the bullying that had started a week ago, explaining how students from other classes had completely ignored Shiron at first. Then, just a few days ago, those same kids began gossiping about him right in the open, not even trying to hide it. Things got worse when they started deliberately disrupting his study sessions in the library. Maria broke down in tears, overwhelmed by the unfairness of it all, which was why she decided to report everything now. Finally, Professor Siena got the full picture of what was really going on. Siena thanked Maria for having the courage to speak up. That night, Shiron was still in the library, studying late like usual. By then, only 2 people were left, him and one other girl. They exchanged quick greetings before Shiron headed back to his dorm. On the way, he found himself lost in thought. Temuran's words echoed in his mind. reminding him to stay patient until the very end. Shiron made a silent promise to himself. He'd stick it out at the academy, even if nobody ever acknowledged him. He'd do it for the people who still believed in him, and for his parents, who he loved more than anything. Back at the dorm, the building was dark except for one lone light still on Shiron's. He'd just finished showering when suddenly, a knock at the door. For a second, he wondered if the bullies were messing with him again. But to his surprise, it was Professor Siena, asking if he was still awake. Shiron let her in, noticing she looked like she'd just come from the baths too. He offered her a seat and quickly made some tea. Siena glanced at the textbooks scattered around and picked up one of his recent exam papers. At first, she thought his grades were off, but then it hit her. He was trying to improve every subject at once. Awkwardly, Shiron sat across from her, curious why she'd come so late. Siena didn't beat around the bush. She brought up the bullying. Shiron admitted it, but told her not to worry about it. As much as he hated the situation, there wasn't much he could do about their hatred. Siena pressed him. Didn't he resent his classmates even a little? Of course he was upset, but in the grand scheme of things, they were just 40 people. He believed someone out there would understand him eventually. That answer made Siena pause, like she'd just realized something important. After a moment, she excused herself, saying it was late and he should get some rest. The next day, Professor Siena called a faculty meeting and proposed promoting Shiron to Class 5. The other teachers were stunned, barely able to believe his progress. One argued they shouldn't waste his talent and should move him up immediately. But as usual, Professor Thad, being his usual stubborn self, objected, which only annoyed Siena more. The headmaster asked Thad to explain himself. Thad admitted Shiron had skill, but without any actual magic, the other students would never accept him. Siena, now fully irritated, clarified that Shiron had been focusing on all subjects at once, leaving no time for magic yet. Thad claimed he didn't care about Shiron's methods. He just thought Siena was playing favorites. That set Siena off, accusing Thad of deliberately holding back a gifted student. The two went back and forth, arguing like always. The other teachers just sighed. Those two were like oil and water, never getting along. Eventually, the headmaster shut it down. He admitted both sides had valid points, so he decided to test the students himself. The following morning, Class 7 students rushed to the announcement board to check the new posting. It detailed a promotion exam, a magic competition focused on teleportation. The winner would skip straight to Class 5. Reactions were mixed. Some saw it as a golden opportunity, while others panicked over the teleportation requirement. Then Shiron appeared, weaving through the crowd toward the board. He stared at the notice, seeing his chance to finally reach Class 5.